Has your 3.5-year-old's behaviour gone into overdrive overnight? My name's Jodie Thornton, and this is a really common experience at around about almost exactly 3.5. And there's a really good reason for this. This is the stage where your child goes through a significant cognitive developmental shift. And I want to talk to you about how that shows up in a behaviour escalation, and also what we can do to help our children through this phase. So the very first thing to understand is that essentially what's happening here is your child's brain is growing. Now, this is a very unscientific explanation, but effectively what's happening is your child's brain has grown new capacity. And in order for the new parts of the brain to connect with the old parts of the brain, the connections between the old parts of the brain need to break. And so that basically means all bets are off, right? And so you can see that come out in more tantrums, in yelling, in defiance, in behavior that's not ideal. Any sort of change in their impulsiveness or their emotional state can all be explained by the shift that's happening here. And particularly we notice it at about 3.5 because of the fact that they're learning so much at once. So at 3.5, what they're learning is far more complexity in communication. So they can understand a lot more of what we talk to them about. They can also express themselves in a lot more detail and a lot more complexity. And also, they're learning a lot physically. So in their gross motor skills and their fine motor skills, but also their independence. So what they can do on their own is really changing during this period. And so you can see this is like a whole new world for them. And for them, it almost kind of feels like you've got a shoe that's too big, right? And so you're not really sure how to walk in a way that's like even and comfortable, and so everything becomes harder. They're far more likely to get upset. They're far more likely to be on random with their behavior, like doing things that they wouldn't normally do, or doing things that they previously, like they've always known they're not allowed to do, but they're previously happy to go along with that. Now all of a sudden they're pushing boundaries. All of those things can happen in this period because they've got new capacity, but they don't yet know how to use all of it. They don't yet know how to integrate what's going on for them. And so this can be a really intense period of changes for them emotionally and physically and behaviorally. So that all being the case, what does that look like for us as parents? So the very first thing is that if you are in a stage where you are entirely overwhelmed and life is just really big and too much, you can just wait out this phase. Like eventually they will grow into this new behavior and they'll get used to it, and things will move forward and things will calm down. How long that takes depends on a whole bunch of factors. There's not really a way to know, but if you're in a situation where actually making some changes about how you're interacting with your child is just a little bit overwhelming, then choosing to wait it out is a totally valid approach. It will be an intense time for you and for them, but if that's where you're at, I want you to be really comfortable that that's okay to just wait for it to pass. If you are not in that state where things are too overwhelming, where you have some capacity to make some shifts and changes in how you interact with your child, we can make an enormous difference for how long this period lasts, how intense it is, and how comfortable it is for your child to go through it, and how easy it is for you and everyone else in your house. So what we can do first is get started with some preemptive emotional regulation. When we look at preemptively regulating the nervous system, it's like if you imagine your nervous system capacity is like a bucket, and when you have unprocessed emotions, then the bucket fills with water. Once your bucket gets full, you're overflowing, and that's when you end up in dysregulation, right? And so if we think about what causes unprocessed emotions, things like not knowing how to express yourself, not feeling like you know how to do things physically that you want to be able to do. So all of these shifts and changes that your child is going through basically will be causing them a temporary period of much greater unprocessed emotions. And so that's what puts them into dysregulation more quickly, or more often and more quickly. And that can really help, that can really be a cause of some of the behavioral issues and all of the emotional overwhelm, right? Then if we look at what controls the size of the bucket, so your child, based on their personality, their temperament, how like predictable their routine is, all of these things can change the size of your child's bucket just generally. But in this period, if you imagine that like you're seeing the world in a greater level of detail, or like your shoes don't fit, or you've just like everything is different, you can imagine that the bucket becomes smaller, right? And so what that means is we either need to get better at processing the emotions, and or we can empty the bucket, right? And that's what preemptive emotional regulation is. And that gives us a chance, if our child has a smaller bucket right now, it gives us a chance to empty that bucket and make sure that they have more space between their regular baseline regulation and any unprocessed emotion, so that they can have a little bit less intensity, a little bit less frequency of behavioral and emotional issues, right? So what does preemptive regulation look like? What we need to do is find two types of activities for your child. The first one is something that helps them to get into a relaxed or like meditative type state. And the second one is things that makes them laugh. And those two types of activities help send your child different signals to their nervous system to say, you're safe, everything's okay. And that basically, like, even though they've got unprocessed emotions, it means that they don't build up and they're less likely to get dysregulated. Or at least they'll slow down how quickly they'll get dysregulated, right? Because they've got more space for the water to come in the bucket before they get overflowing. So for the meditative activity, some of you may laugh at me, but some 3-year-olds really will meditate. And it's extremely rare, but I always mention it for two reasons. One is that if you happen to have the child that will meditate, I want you to choose that, because meditation is like the ideal objective that we're kind of aiming towards. The second reason I mention meditation, even though for most of us, our children are not going to be meditators at this age, what that gives you is a sense of what we're heading towards, that sense of deep physical and emotional relaxation, that sense of like mental stillness. That's what we would like to head towards. So any activity that gets your child closer to that sense of relaxation or that deep meditative flow state will be helpful here. You can use things like drawing, painting, stretching, kids yoga. You can also get like online storybooks that are like designed for emotional regulation. Like they're actually like almost like guided meditations, and sometimes they're just stories, but the way they're read is very low and slow and not very stimulating, right? Like those kinds of audiobooks can really help. Now, even at 3.5, I would like you to ask your child, when does your body feel most relaxed? So in my case, I asked my now 10-year-old, she would have been about 5, so a little bit older than this now. I asked her, when does your body feel most relaxed? And she said when she's at the pool. Now, at the time, we weren't going to the pool very often, and so I would never have guessed that the pool would be her suggestion. And at the time, again, it wasn't realistic for us to go to the pool regularly, but what I could do is make sure that I created as long a time frame for bath time as I could, and then that way she could get more time in the water, which is as close as I could get in a realistic and practical way, according to our like routine at the time, right? But you can see how even at 3, although my daughter was 5, around about 5 at the time I asked her, even for a 3-year-old, I want you to be asking, partly because we want our children to start thinking about these things, but also you just never know what they'll come up with that you wouldn't have thought of, right? And so asking them, when does their body feel most relaxed? The second type of activity is anything that gets them laughing, with one exception, which is tickling. So tickling activates both our fun senses, but also our fear senses. And so when our goal is to reduce our baseline level of regulation, we want to start with a lower level of dysregulation, then tickling may or may not, like in some cases it won't make any difference, but in some cases it's actually counterproductive because it's still activating those fear sensors. So it's kind of like cancelling out the fear sensor activation is cancelling out the fun activation. We want to avoid tickling when we're in this kind of, when this is our goal. So anything else that gets your child to laugh. So funny faces, funny games, funny stories, jumping, surprises, like anything that you can find that makes your child laugh. Again, that just gives a different signal to our nervous system that we're safe and everything is going to be okay. So once you have identified a couple of activities, and you can experiment with things and see like what works best for you, ideally what we would do is do one of each category every day. Now, for some of us, that is really difficult to achieve practically. It can be a very busy stage from a family perspective, or maybe you have a newborn. Like, there's so many reasons why doing one of those activities every day just might not be realistic for you. And pushing to create time for something that's supposed to regulate your nervous system by overstretching yourself and then you get dysregulated, right? That's going to be counterproductive. So what we want to do is only do as much as is realistic and practical for you. So if that means once a week, that means once a week. If it means even once a fortnight, like whatever we can do is going to be helpful, and pushing over your limits is actually going to be counterproductive, because the more dysregulated you are, the more they can sense that, and it makes them less regulated, right? So if you can do daily, daily. If you can't do daily, as often as you can without overstretching yourself is great. So that's basically what we're doing to make sure that we're starting from a lower emotional dysregulation, right? From their baseline emotional regulation is more solid and grounded, so that when they're experiencing this like sense that, I don't really know how to do anything and everything's different now and everything's harder, my emotions are really quick, they're at least starting from that more regulated space. And that takes a little bit of the edge off for them and for you, and gives you a little bit more space to be able to start helping them with their emotional awareness and their communication skills, and getting used to all this new capacity that they have. So what to do next? So at 3.5, the most common things that will happen is tantrums, defiance or not listening, and lashing out physically. So hitting, kicking, biting, all of those things. What we want to be doing in this stage is helping your child to recognize that all three of those things are symptoms of not knowing what to do with their feelings, right? A feeling comes up, I feel frustrated, I feel sad, I feel annoyed, I feel there's some kind of feeling coming up, I don't know what to do with it, and then it spills out in tantrums, not listening or defiance, or lashing out physically. Now, there are some other ways that it would come out, but those are the most frequent. Where we want to focus your attention as the parent is the part of their behavior that is most draining for you. And that might be the thing that happens most frequently, or it might be the thing that when it happens, it's so triggering or so draining that you then end up being reactive for the rest of the day. And so that bit, whichever one is like the most draining for you, we want to focus on that. The reason we're focusing on what's most draining for you is because for most 3.5-year-olds, we've got so much of a shift happening that the more emotional capacity you have to help them build their skills, to help them deal with their feelings in a constructive way, and to help them navigate through this time where everything feels overwhelming for them, the easier it is for both of you. So we want to really prioritize what helps your capacity as the parent, only until we resolve that one, right? And then we go to the next, and hopefully you've only got 3, but sometimes it takes a bit longer, right? But the more we can get into that space where you have more emotional space to be responsive rather than reactive, the easier it is for you to help support your child through this difficult phase for them. So if your child's behavior is spilling out in tantrums, defiance or not listening, or hitting, biting or kicking, I will provide a link in the notes of in the comments below this video to my free webinars on each of those. So supporting kids through tantrums, helping your strong-willed child to listen, and helping your child stop hitting, which the approach is still good for kicking and biting or other ways that they're physically lashing out. Those 3 free webinars will take you through the step-by-step of helping your child to identify what are the feelings that are happening, and what can they do before they get overwhelmed to resolve those feelings so that the feelings don't spill out in those behaviors. If your child is not showing those behaviors, but there's something else, or if you have any other questions, please do send me a message and we can find if I have a free resource, I'll send it. And if I don't, I can give you some tips to get started. Now, if you're in this stage and you're thinking, gosh, this sounds really intense, and it's great to understand it, but still it sounds really intense, I want you to know that if you're helping your child with their regulation and you're helping your child with their emotional awareness and actually doing something with the feelings that are coming out so they don't spill out in those behaviors, things will get easier week on week. Now, at 3.5, it's quite an intense period, so it doesn't necessarily mean that like within a week or 2 weeks, everything will get easier. But if you're actually looking at the root causes of what's going on for your child, you will find that within a week, 2 weeks at most, you will see that things are improving. If that's not the case for you, or if you just want to take the fast track approach, I would love to support you through this stage. So if you book a call with me at jodiethornton.com/call, we can jump on a Zoom call and talk about where is your child at, what behaviors are coming up, what have you tried with regulation, what have you tried with the other aspects of their behavior, what's working and what's not working, and I can help you to really fast track getting to a place where this phase is a lot easier for your child and for you. I also would like to say that this stage is so much of an opportunity to work on your child's emotional awareness and communication skills, because their feelings are so intense that we get such quick and clear feedback about what is and isn't working. So if you have the capacity to work on it now, I highly recommend it, because you really will see such an enormous boost in your child's behavior, in your child's emotional development, even in making sure that your relationship feels really nice, because sometimes these intense periods can actually start to feel like it's really hard work being around your child, and we can really address that. If you'd like my support, book one of those free calls and we'll just have a chat about where things are up to, and I can talk to you about how I would support you to really fast track that process of building up your child's emotional awareness, looking at what are those deep underlying needs that your child has so that we can resolve them before it starts spilling out into tantrums, defiance, and physically lashing out. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to send me an email. I'm Jodi at jodiethornton.com.